think we're going. Yes, okay, I see the dot. All right, so good evening, everyone. We're here discussing Book 5 of Paradise Lost, so just continuing on with our weekly discussion. For those of you in this class and those of you listening, just remember that there is no class next Wednesday. That's June 18th. I will be out of town and I cannot meet, so we will continue on the 25th with Book 6, and we'll go up from there. But we're here tonight doing Book 5, so we've already gone through, we've gotten, basically Satan's gotten to Eden, we've gotten his perspective on really, the earthly paradise, Eden, Adam and Eve specifically, and kind of what he thinks about them, and even just some really lovely descriptions of them and their marriage and them as people and the beauty of creation in general. So we're going to get more of that here, and then we're going to also get into really the story of the angelic fall, which is very interesting, and we'll continue on in further books. So starting off, I guess first of all, did either of you have really any observations you wanted to point out just with this this description? Really, it's this first basically 24 lines roughly of Book 5.
Yeah, I like that I underlined that they come forth to their day labors and start with a morning hymn at the door of their bower. Yeah, I thought that was cool that they do that each morning.
I didn't have any specifically on just the first few lines, but I was beautiful description. I liked the morn, her rosy steps. I guess maybe that was a reference to the dawn with her rosy fingers. I think that's a Homeric thing.
Yeah, you might be right. I'm not entirely sure, but
yeah, it was just one of those. What's the word for it? It's something in literature where I think Lewis talks about this in his preface to Paradise Lost, where it's just a repeated kind of description or phrase that's used repeatedly, and that was one for those poems, because he's kind of defending people who attack Paradise Lost for having certain repetitious elements. He's saying it's actually a sign of a good poem.
Yeah, absolutely.
The footnote does say it's a Homeric description of God. So good job.
Oh, nice. Cha-ching. Oh, I see it too. Yeah, you have the second Norton Critical.
Yeah.
There you go. Yep, okay.
Very nice.
I clearly did not look at the footnotes, so on this discussion, I don't read all of them all the time, so okay, yeah, great. This is kind of a weird observation that I've made upon just multiple readings of Paradise Lost, but has anybody else has gotten the sense that it kind of talks about as Eve being beautiful, but that it doesn't really talk about Adam being the same way? Because does anybody else pick up on, and even in a sense that Eve almost has to in a way be
yes.
instructed that
she's gonna turn around to go back, look in the lake. She's I liked the appearance of her. She liked the appearance of her reflection better than she liked the appearance of Adam. And then Adam is wait.
Yeah, I think I just the first time I read this, I think I just automatically assumed that Adam was basically going to be the Giga Chad meme aesthetic, or he's the statue of Michelangelo's David or something like that. But I'm just is he just super average looking for some? I don't know. It's just something I've noticed, and I'm why did Milton exactly do that anyway? Regardless of the point, I guess.
Even if he was that, even if he was compared with Eve, who is the most beautiful feminine form or whatever, I guess he just doesn't compare in the same way in terms of, but he'd just be emphasizing it just to emphasize Eve's representing beauty in her role. Maybe Adam wasn't actually that bad looking, but just for the sake of emphasizing Eve's beauty, he's decided that Adam is gonna be more complimented on his intellect and reason.
Yeah, no, it's not I think Eve is a goddess, and then Adam looks like a cave troll who's 4'3" or something. But
can you imagine?
He's like played by like Danny DeVito or something. Like
He does have a description of like Adam's hair. He goes into a lot of depth about his hair, and when he first describes him, that seems to be like, what does he even say? I remember we were talking about the significance of Adam's hair.
well, yeah, because like at the time, there's like the Roundheads and like the Cavaliers, and like Milton was like at one point a part of like the Roundheads group. That was like, the Puritans had like the Roundhead hairstyle in his time, and a lot of them were also either supporters of like Oliver Cromwell's party or were actually in Oliver Cromwell's party in some way in the 1640s. And so I think like some of the hair illusions in there at least have something to do with that. Like if you ever see one, you can look at it closely and let me know what you think. But there's definitely something there with that at least. But I don't have the description of like Adam's hair pulled up right at the moment.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing. Because you're right, Adam's never, described as like Michelangelo's David.
It's like, and he's chiseled out of marble, and he's 6'5" with blue eyes. Like, I don't know, like, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but
Yes.
well, I do wonder if there's like actually an insight there, because this is like, I hear this a lot. Like, I don't know how true it is, and I don't know if it'd be different before the fall, but there's kind of this odage where like, and it sounds like really shallow sometimes on the part of like how men are, but like where it's like a woman can like not really think a man is attractive, but grow to like him sometimes through like just like his character and like fall in love with him. But like men, if they like don't initially think a girl is like pretty or attractive, even if they really like her as a person, it's like very hard for them to sometimes develop like a deep sort of affection for them in like a romantic sense. And I don't know if anybody else has ever like heard like this, like, your own life or your friends or whoever, but I found that to be generally true, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not. Like if that's just like a natural thing that's not even part of the fall. I don't know if that's what he's implying there or not, but
on the female end, I found that to be true just among like people I know and things. I do think there's something to that. There's definitely, and even you see this just in so many movies and books and things, when the females, like characters portrayed, like where it's not love at first sight right away, but it becomes that as she gets to know the man. Whereas it often seems a lot of times, just the way it's portrayed, even like in media, is that the man is just kind of like, he just knows like right away or like pretty quickly,
right,
whether he's interested in a woman or not.
Yeah, I do think that's generally true. Just speaking from
So
my
I think,
own life, like, friends with people of both genders, I find that to be generally true. And maybe that's like in some way what he's saying here. I'm not sure what, it'd be really hard to like actually explicitly hear, like find somewhere where Milton actually talked about some of these things like that. But that's one of those things where it's like it could just be there like implicitly like in the text in a way, but I'm not sure. It's just kind of an interesting observation that I've noticed, and others that I've studied this with in the past have noticed as well.
Yeah, I do think he's doing something intentional, just from the way he describes and just kind of portrays the relationship, and even all the focus he gives about how like Eve was just staring at her own reflection and how she almost like saw Adam and wasn't like super impressed at first, but once he started speaking to her, she changed her mind pretty quickly. So that is interesting.
Yeah, I think it goes with like typical. I mean, they always say like guys are more like attracted or stimulated like visually, and women are more like mentally or like through reading or like just like words more than. So that would kind of line up with that.
Yeah, no, I definitely think so too. So yeah, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one that's like noticed that, because others have mentioned that the past too, and I don't know if I noticed it the first time, but definitely like the second time around I did. But okay, I mean, if we didn't have, we could probably just like move on from there in general. But Adam and Eve are obviously together, and then they start to have this conversation, right? And if we remember from book 4, Satan, before he was like poked by the spear of the angel and kind of thrown out of his frog stance or whatever he was actually trying to do there. He did like seemingly whisper, something into Eve, like some sort of dreamlike idea or sequence like that she received in some way. And this definitely like elaborates on that, right? Where like Eve goes and she tells Adam about the dream. And so my question here would be, like, what do you think of like this idea? Because it's obviously like it's not really a dream, it's a nightmare. So like what do you think of like Eve having a nightmare in like pre-fallen Eden?
I do think since Satan is the one, like, it is interesting that you even have category to understand like what that is. Because in my mind, it would seem that the only way that a nightmare would be possible, because there is no evil, would be just Satan. Like, I can understand it happening if Satan's there, like whispering in her ear, like his power to actually make that happen, I guess. If he's like just kind of like tempting, and like anything that comes out of his mouth is going to be like, it's not going to be a pleasant dream. But it is interesting that they even have like words to describe evil. Like Adam says that the stream is sprung out of evil. He fears, and that's just interesting to me. Like, I suppose they would be. It's interesting because they would have never encountered anything evil before. So it's almost strange to me that they have like terminology for it. But I guess like at the same time, is that, I don't know. They just seem like less surprised or like confounded by the evil that Eve has encountered in their dream, which it should be their first time. So it's kind of, I don't know. It was interesting to think about.
Yeah, I think I just have never really put too much thought into like the whole timeline, because it, it just says like, oh, she was persuaded like in the moment. Like, I would just assume, oh, it's in the moment, but I don't know. I mean, it's interesting how he appeals to her through like appealing to her vanity and stuff through his dream, and envy and everything. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I had some interesting thoughts about actually what was in the dream. Like, one thing that was interesting was like Satan, when he's talking about the fruit in Eve's dream, he says, "O fruit divine, sweet of thyself, but much more sweet thus cropped, forbidden here." That reminded me of like in Augustine, when he's like stealing the pears, and he basically says that the sin itself was sweeter than like the reward of it, and it's literally fruit. So I was just wondering if maybe there was some tie there, or at least a similar concept of like he's saying it's sweeter to take it like than the fruit itself. The actual taking of it is sweeter, like going against God's command. So I thought that was really interesting. And then it was just so interesting that he said to Eve just the old lie, which is just happier thou mayst be. And then we see later that Raphael like kind of rebuts that. And I don't have like the exact line number, but he says to Adam when he kind of comes to the house, he says, "Meanwhile, enjoy your fill, what happiness this happy state can comprehend, incapable of more." So he's really rebutting the idea that God is withholding something from them, or that they can be happier, but is saying rather that they're incapable of more happiness, that they should enjoy the happiness they have. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's cool to see how he comes. I mean, interesting to see how he comes from multiple angles. Starts off with appeal to vanity, and then temptation. And she's at first, from that line that you read, she's disgusted when he plucked it. He tasted me damp horror chilled at such bold words vouched with a deed so bold. And then afterwards, he's like wrapping the sinful behavior kind of in like good intentions, like, because how much better would it be if there's multiple gods, if you're like God, if one God's good, then multiple ones are obviously going to be better. So
yeah, just the lines like, since good, the more communicated, more abundant grows. The author not impaired, but honored more. Like, what a clever lie in a sense. because he's taking some things that are true and he's just kind of twisting them a little bit. And like obviously what he's saying is very false here. But he's claiming that by Eve becoming a goddess, like that would honor God more, when in reality, to act against his command would be to like despise his honor and to go against it. Instead of like basically he's telling her not to worship him as she should and give him the honor that's due him, but to try to take his place as a god. But then he's like making it be like, oh, but this will actually be, giving God more honor because more gods.
Yeah, no, definitely. I definitely think you all explained that really well and pretty much are taking out the things that are like really primary there. Back on the Augustine thing really quick, and I'll like mention this a lot more later as I've pointed to when we get to a relevant part, but did either of you read chapter 10 of Preface to Paradise Lost yet by chance?
I have. I don't recall which chapter exactly that was.
Okay, well, that one it's either Milton and St. Augustine or St. Augustine and Milton. I can't remember the names. But yeah, I mean, it's mostly about, and I'm going to like actually make the points later on more in depth, but he's really showing how like Milton's like imagination for things regarding the fall that aren't explicitly in like Genesis 1-3 are really in line with like the Western Augustinian tradition of the church throughout the centuries. But like that's mostly what that chapter is about. But like you can really see that Augustine is really all over Paradise Lost in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I'm already in the way losing the exact point you made about Augustine now, but I just want to make sure that was pointed out.
I said that Satan's lines to Eve when he takes the fruit are, "O fruit divine, sweet of thyself, but much more sweet, thus crop."
Okay, you were drawing a parallel to the pear scene in
Yes.
Confessions. I can't remember if that's like book 3 or 2 or
it's 2 or 3. I've been rereading through Confessions at the same time, so
oh, nice.
it's actually like great. I didn't even realize that this would be so good to read together, but it is kind of tying in strange ways.
It's really weird. All the stuff that I'm reading right now is like tying together so well. Augustine, Paradise Lost. I'm reading the book Stoner, which has a lot of like references to Milton, just because it's about literature and stuff.
That's a great book. I like Stoner a lot.
What's it about? Not to go on track. I'll look it up.
Yeah, maybe we could hold that thought. We can maybe talk about it like after the recording pauses. But I would be happy to talk to you about that book. It's very good, a great novel. But yeah, like so this is important to understand. And you all probably like either know this or at least picking this up. But like throughout, like really, I mean, Milton's obviously going to have a lot of just deep seeds of the Western ecclesial tradition running in him, right? Like in a sense, like if you're like really like robustly Protestant, and what I mean by that is like you're not just not Catholic or Orthodox, but you actually like hold a lot of the same views that the Protestant reformers of like the 16th centuries held, which Milton did, and for the most part, I would say. The seeds of Augustine are just ridiculously deep in that, right? Like that's I mean, whether it's like the Lutheran Church, the Anglican tradition, like the broadly like Reformed Calvinistic tradition, like you can't like not see fragments of Augustine embedded into all of these mainline Protestant traditions in a sense. So yeah, like it would make sense that you would see Augustine in this in a sense too, because Milton and undoubtedly read a lot of Augustine like in the original Latin. Like he could probably like be half awake reading that without even breaking a sweat because he was so good at Latin. But he knew Augustine well, right? And even the people he was probably reading, in terms of like his theological background, were probably at least influenced by Augustine, either a lot or at least a decent amount. Just knowing that, like anybody who's basically in the Western Church after roughly 400 AD is just influenced by Augustine in at least some major way or another. So undoubtedly that you see that, but I do think you're right. There probably is like some parallels there, and I think it's just like in general that just says something deeper about like sin itself, where it's
Yes.
like it's about something greater than like just the act of like material gain, right? Because like it's like if you steal a pear from somebody in Augustine's world, whatever that would translate to in our world, like you do like there's some like level where there's greed, there's avarice there's selfishness, and you like in some material way like gain from that, some consumeristic way you gain from that, but it's the actual just like sinful desire itself. There's something about that is um pleasing in like a more diabolical way in a sense. And maybe we all relate to this in one way or another, in some other way. But I know, I can't remember how old Augustine is when he's like doing that. Maybe like what, like 15, 16, maybe.
Teens, yeah.
I definitely had my antics when I was 16. I had worse antics when I was 18 or 19. It's like I can say that it's like, yeah, there's it's like the cheesy movie thing where it's like yeah, I like being bad, but it's like you kind of just do at first, and then like it hopefully like you grow a conviction and like you just become miserable so that you can like repent and point back towards the good, aka God. But like there's something to all of that, right? And there's this sense that like the nightmare, it's like just remember that like Satan brings hell with him wherever he goes. Like he is hell. Like in a way, like he literally looks like hell, as however you can actually imagine that and how it's described in book 4, even in some vivid ways. But there's this. I'm gonna drop a link in the chat to a video that I think is really interesting on this topic. But we talked about the concept of theodicy in the first week, and it's usually like responding. Theodicy is usually just responding, and so providing some sort of justification for like the Christian faith responding to charges regarding the problem of evil. Usually, so like it's like, why did a all-powerful, all-good, all-loving God, like why does he allow evil and pain and suffering to coexist at the same time that he is eternally and immutably all of those things? Right, like that's the charge of like the problem of evil. And there's this one not as commonly talked about theodicy that has to do with really all of the stuff that Paradise Lost is talking about. Whether Milton agrees with it fully or not can be debated, but there's this theodicy called like angelic fall theodicy. I don't know if you all have ever heard of that term before.
I don't
Maybe not.
think so.
So basically, like angelic fall theodicy is talking about how it's kind of I've just heard it like described as like a theodicy for like sometimes like the seeming like justification of like something like animal suffering or things like that, things that just maybe don't exactly directly happen to humans. But there's kind of like this theory that some theologians have talked about in history where there's this peculiar sort of badness or bentness or sort of privations that exist in some way in the cosmos as a result of like Satan's rebellion and the fall of the angels, though it doesn't cause like humans to fall directly, and it doesn't bring original sin upon humans like Adam and Eve's fall does. It some way brings some type of like evil through like privations into the world, if that makes sense.
Which would, in some sense, make sense in that, like, when Adam fell, then, like, the earth itself, like, there's all this sin. But then it's interesting to think of, like, when the angels fell, wherever they were inhabiting, were there consequences? I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's like different people like can, I guess, hash it out in different parts of like the overall like cosmological timeline of like for creation of humans, like during like however that looks. But that is something that's been talked about. I mean, even like if you watch that video, I mean, there's like quotes all over the place about like Augustine and Aquinas talking about this in like their angelology. And like you even see this in a sense like with I don't know if you exactly see it manifest like directly in terms of like animal suffering stuff in the Silmarillion. I can't remember, but you certainly see like this aspect where like, you know, the rebellious Valar and the ones that stay true to, you know, Eru Ilúvatar. There's an angelic war that takes place basically before everything else in a sense. And not to like spoil too much about book 6 because that's next time, but like you'll definitely see even maybe Tolkien and Milton were just a part of the same tradition and playing around with that idea in a sense, where it's like this idea of like this angelic warfare like actually happening, or that even being just like representative of like spiritual warfare in a way. But just all things to consider. Not to like belabor that too much.
Interesting. I'm excited.
Yeah, I know Augustine went into that a lot, or I haven't got to that part yet, just like some sections that they had us read for the philosophy class, but it was about kind of like how was there even corruption by it being made by God, and then we kind of see that later in this book, which is interesting. So
let's see. I think we already kind of talked about like the nightmare itself. You definitely raised some interesting questions too, just about like this kind of like the nature of like that nightmare and like really, yeah, even like the response to it, right? Like, is that like it's worth considering like with other things? Is like, is there a point to that like we're missing, or is it just like a possible like weakness of like the writing itself? Like should they like be more surprised by that? Should they be more ignorant and in a sense maybe even innocent to the point where they shouldn't like they should be more like astonishing in a way, right?
Yeah, because if Milton's going to say that, like, this almost seems inconsistent, but also I'm willing to be wrong, probably. But just putting this out here, like, if Uriel was fooled by Satan's disguise at first, at least, because, like, no one but God can discern hypocrisy, and because he'd never experienced deception before. Like, and he's, like, this all-powerful, like, one of the 7, like, most powerful angels. And then it's almost, like, surprising that Adam and Eve are able to so easily recognize like evil for what it is, in a sense. Like Adam seems to see so clearly before Raphael even comes, like what's going on. It just makes me wonder, because it's like Uriel just didn't even like have a clue about Satan.
Yeah, I feel like Eve's kind of response is not really like, I would see that more line up with, because it's more of surprise. It's more of like, she has damp horror, you know, like because of what's like written on her heart in terms of natural, like universal truths and stuff. She can understand that something's wrong when it goes against the obedience. So like when she says, "But oh, how glad I wake to find this but a dream," just knowing that like it's wasn't real. But I mean, I feel like even if you didn't know something was wrong, you can feel it being wrong a little bit, you know?
Yeah, I liked her reaction to it in a way. She just seemed very like she knew something was wrong and she was very disturbed by it. It is just interesting. I actually need to look back at what Adam says. He kind of immediately concludes that this is from evil. And it just kind of surprised me, at least, of like my initial conceptions of what I expected him to say. I'm not necessarily sure that's wrong. It surprised me that he almost immediately was like, "This uncouth dream of evil sprung, I fear." Like, how can you know of evil? Like, I don't know. It seems like he pretty much instantly knows. It's like, how much can he know about evil, having never experienced it in any way? I mean, obviously, like, I guess he could know, okay, it's just going against what God says, but it still is interesting.
But I mean, he also says like, you can't even like, where's the evil from? You can't harbor any because you were created pure. And then he kind of goes through and says like, compares reason to fancy or imagination,
Mhm.
and kind of how that's affected in dreams and misjoining stuff.
That was definitely not quite the reaction I expected Adam to have. Because this discourse on like dreams and the imagination and stuff. It was very interesting. But what does he even? I need to actually study this more because I think I kind of just like went through it. I didn't really spend a lot of time on what he said. I just remember being surprised.
Yeah, later on he also says, which gives me hope that what in sleep thou didst abhor to dream, waking thou never wilt consent to do.
Da, da, da.
Yeah. Foreshadow.
I love how much faith he has. That
I think in a sense, this conversation in a way is kind of supposed to leave you kind of hanging with this overarching question of like how much does this actually affect Eve, right? Like how much is this gonna play in with like leading up to the fall? Like is it gonna like bother her through the rest of the poem up until the fall? Like is this like really is this like significant in the whole process of like Satan showing up in Eden and then them falling, right? Like it's like in a sense I mean, have you ever like had somebody, whether this could be a positive or a negative in a way, I suppose, but have you ever had somebody just kind of like probe you with an idea that you've never heard before, and then you're like up like half the night or more just thinking about it? Like it's like that like meme of like SpongeBob laying on his bed and his eyes are wide open or whatever. It's like I've had that, right? It's like I've like in like negative and positive versions of that, right? Where like that has happened to me, and that's like the sense that you might get here, right? Where it's like Satan's got to be smart enough to know where it's like you might not convince somebody in his sense to do this. You might not convince somebody by planting ideas in their head in a dream. You might not convince somebody in the first conversation. You might not in the second. You might not even in the 5th or the 10th. But eventually, like it's gonna land.
Like in Traylor.
What's hanging out here, like as we're going through the poem. Like he's like, I'm just gonna drop this on you, and all right, see you later. Have a good day. And like for him, he's just walking away, probably smarmy, just like laughing to himself while she's like, wait, what?
That reminds me so much of Paralandra and like the Unman and the Green Lady, and
That's
how
for sure.
just the relentless, consistent, like just planting of ideas. It's not just like an all-out attack. He's like very patient and just like planting questions and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
yeah,
he just has a little dream and he just kind of saunters away.
Has overwhelmed.
To return.
I mean, we said it before, but it's like there's no I don't think there's any Miltonic influence on C.S. Lewis. It's like more clearly evident than Paralandra. Like it's like it really is like Paradise Lost meets like the Ransom trilogy. Like it really is what Paralandra is. Right?
I cannot wait to reread the Ransom trilogy, having read Milton, because I think it will shed some new light on the way he portrays things.
Real quick, have you read Dante?
Yes.
Okay, I think the Divine Comedy also, like, it doesn't always get talked about as much at times, but like if you read Dante and then you go back and read the Ransom trilogy, like you can't unsee any of it. Like you're just like, wow, it's like it's all over the place, right? Everything.
I haven't read it since reading Dante either, but I've kind of just decided to read the Ransom trilogy every year if I can, because I love it so much. So I'll get to it maybe this winter or fall.
For sure, yeah. But yeah, I think it's kind of another interesting aspect of this conversation, where I just noticed like the timing, and maybe it's just because like I've been married for a few years that just like this comes to me naturally, but it's like Eve, like she's troubled, and I think there's something really like virtuous just about the fact that she's like instantly like just goes and talks to her spouse about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's like that's it's like a good like healthy like unfallen example of like what you're really supposed to do, right? It's like, oh man, like we need to be unified and I'm struggling and I need to talk to them about it, and like also in accordance with that, just like the the sort of like complementarian-esque roles in which they play. It's like whether she knows this or not, like she probably does. There's a role in which her and her fear, like the masculine husband figure protector, is supposed to like be able to help her and encourage her with that. And like that's basically what he does there. Like when he kind of responds in lines 95 through 128, he's basically like giving this response that like something along the lines of like reason like governs all in a sense. And that's kind of like very platonic in a way too, where it's like ultimately like the and like the parts of being, it's like the rational part of being has the power to govern itself over like the lower parts of being in a way, right? Like the appetites and like all the other faculties. And because they're unfallen, like that's true in a sense, right? I think for Milton, with both his Christian Platonism and his more like libertarian free will convention of in terms of just like the debates on like free will and the sovereignty of God. For Milton, I really see it as unfallen beings through like they still have the power of the faculty of reason in a libertarian sense to freely choose to like properly be virtuous and govern the appetites and the desires and such things. Whereas with unfallen beings, and this is Augustinian in a way too, where it's like without like the grace of God being effectual in some way, like the will is just like bent towards bad, whereas when one is regenerated, whether that be like via baptism or the Holy Spirit, or really I guess both of those things is ultimately the Holy Spirit in most theological traditions, it brings you to an ability where you can choose to not sin freely in a way, but you're still in some ways also bent towards sin. But like they don't have that before the fall, right? Like it's different, where it's like that inclination like to sin or not to sin is different than it is for the will of a Christian like post fall, if that makes sense. Just like things to consider there, but I think that's what he's getting at there overall. And it's like worth noting too how it's like the will is it's different for them. It's completely different.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of think of the way that like bad guys would get at like attack a marriage is kind of in the same way that Satan's doing here. It's like the way that he goes after Eve, he makes sure that it's in her dream, so she's separated from Adam in that way, so that he can have her one-on-one. Because if Adam's there, then he can bring in more reason, which can stop kind of like what's happening in its tracks. But without him, he can just kind of like push her along or guide her along, which is like you were saying, it's so good that she went to him the next morning and he's kind of able to talk her through it. More like if you're attacked, if he was attacking the marriage in a different way, there's a lot of ways that he could attack Adam, but this one wouldn't work as well, so.
Yeah, definitely. So really after the conversation, we kind of get this imagery of like pre-lapse Syrian like worship in a sense. Like I thought that was kind of cool. They almost have like their own like morning liturgy in a sense. But like what sticks out to you all about that?
I think you get the great dance in there, and lines like 161 to 165, just talking about the angels circling the throne rejoicing, which reminded me of joining the great dance. And I think I like how it started at the very beginning, where it says their maker in fit strains pronounced or sung unmeditated, Such prompt eloquence flowed from their lips in prose or numerous verse. Or Milton's like basically saying that like these are natural poets. Like they don't have to even study it. It's just the way they're talking or singing or worshiping. It's coming out beautifully.
I really love that part. And I love also the part where kind of in their worship and prayer, they even like directly address the sun and they say, acknowledge him thy greater. I just love that little section too, because it's just like almost a little reference to like later so many people throughout human history like worshiping the sun. And even like with Satan when he comes up, from hell, like just being astonished at the sun, but saying like the creator of the sun. Like I love that kind of just image of all this right view of creation. Like it's glorious, but all of it's meant to point back to the greater one, the creator. And they just have such a rightly ordered view of everything in their worship.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you read that and you're probably, I'm just like, man, like I want that. Like that sounds so delightful. Like it's like I like wish I was just like that all the time, but I'm not, right? Like I certainly feel that way when I read things like that. Yeah, I think I had something. Oh, Chase, yeah, you mentioned like the angelic dance part, and that's a very like just like medieval thing for sure, right? So if like you ever read like the Divine Comedy someday, like the last part, Paradiso, like where Dante's in the heavens, it talks about like I guess he's like basically as he's like ascending to a new sphere, which is like a higher heaven in Dante. There's like one like the way like it's not like as like necessarily linear as it is like this like kind of like circular pattern in a lot of ways in which he ascends, but there's also like this like sense of like angelic like celestial dance, like especially as he gets into like the higher heavens in a way too. And that's a lot of that is like music, like dance, all those things. So in like the medieval like the quadrivium, right, which is like astronomy, arithmetic, geometry, and music, those are like some like the main like medieval like liberal arts subjects. These things all like really represent like kind of like the harmonic order of creation in a sense, where it's like they're not necessarily in unison, but they all perfectly work in accordance together, playing their different parts. And it's like if you ever like I've played music most of my life, so this is familiar to me, but it's just like you go to like an orchestra or a concert and like just the amount of pieces that go into that, like you can't like explain the beauty of a well written and well composed and like a perfectly performed or nearly perfectly performed piece of like symphonic music, right? Or like a choir just with all its parts in gear, like when it's got masterful singers at like every level on the range all singing together, and it's a really well composed vocal piece. It's kind of like that, like that's what like that celestial dance is supposed to represent, just that like harmonic perfection of the cosmos as God has created it. So that's just like part of like the worship that they're acknowledging there. But I think like some of this just like kind of ties into like the poetic nature and just kind of like the really philosophy of poetry itself. But for Milton specifically, like poetry is really ultimately about like praise and rendering praise due to God in a way. And this is kind of probably related in some ways to like Tolkien, like on fairy stories, right? Where it's like we sub-create, and there's like a sense where poetry is like an expression of that. Like it's a expression that's totally different from other forms of art in a way. But I think we just kind of like see that language all throughout. Like we see like really remnants of a lot of like the Psalms, really, where it's just like the heaven and earth declare the glory of God in a way, right? Like I think that's just kind of like littered all throughout that in a way. But really, I think there's also just this sense of like just seeing this. It's almost like proto-romantic in a way, if that terminology makes sense to anybody, where like you have the Romantics in the 19th century, and these are like the poets, like basically the major English poets of like the early 19th century were the Romantics, and people did that. People did Romanticism after them too, but really what they're responding to is just what they saw as like just like the grossness of the overly rationalistic and mechanical view of metaphysics from a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers. And there's a sense where like Milton's almost kind of like doing that in a way with his descriptions of creation, but it's really like before the Enlightenment. But Milton was dealing with just like Romanticism was kind of like post-Enlightenment rationalism, but like pre-Enlightenment rationalism existed in Milton's day, and perhaps in some ways his poetic descriptions were, in a way, even like pushing against that in a way. Worth considering. All right, were we all good with like the kind of like the whole section like on fallen worship? Like I think it's a really cool part. There's probably a lot we could say, but obviously only so little time to talk about a book.
Yeah, we could do a separate meeting for each, like just if you, I don't know, even just a section of a book.
Yeah, no, and I always remember that it's like, you know, like it's a great book when you can have a lot of meaningful conversation broken up like this, and there's still just, you basically don't get to talk about most things at the end of the day, right? Like that's really one of the marks of a great book, in my opinion. So we kind of get this transition and like the narrative here, where now, this is starting at line 224, where God starts speaking, and basically, we go out of Eden. We get to like God basically giving Raphael this commission to go warn Adam and Eve, but it's not really just like a warning. And you're definitely going to see this play out in the next couple of books, but he's really like giving Raphael the job of being Adam's tutor, in a sense. Tutor in like the medieval, like early modern sense, where it's like a highly professional educator just teaching somebody about some or all of the liberal arts in a way. And that's like what Raphael is going to be to Adam. Like that's like one of his primary roles for Milton in this entire poem is to teach Adam so that he can be prepared, right? Like this ties in with Milton's philosophy of education, where it's like part of education is preparing people, especially men, to be virtuous and to lead well and to make good decisions, right? And so he knows that Satan's coming after him, and he's to go prepare Adam for that, like, right, so he can make the right choice and so that he can not fall. Like that's what Raphael's role is going to be in this poem. Anyway, so after that, sorry, do we have any comments on like anything, I guess, with Raphael and like Raphael and God speaking before I jump us forward a little bit?
No.
Okay.
Good section, but yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to leave actually a question that I just looked over at my sheet and saw, but here's something to keep in mind as well. So we all know the story, right? Like we all know the climax of the poem is going to be the fall, right? Unfortunately for all of us, that's the story, not just in this poem, but in reality. And so Raphael's Adam's teacher, he's to prepare this for it. So just like think about this as you're going through, like, because it's going to be hard to have an answer now since you haven't seen enough of Raphael yet, in my opinion, in book 5. But just think about, like, as you're going through this, is there any sense in which the fall is Raphael's fault? Like, did he fail as a teacher in a way? Like, it's like, should he have been is there a sense where the onus is on him as an educator because he could have done something different to help Adam be more prepared, right? And this is just like kind of like probing into that question of like just education itself in a sense, right? And like how much can education prepare somebody to freely choose to make the right decisions? So if anything, just keep that in the back of your mind. It's like it's hard to like kind of give a full answer on that, but worth considering, and especially as you actually see what Raphael is doing, maybe that'll be more clear with time. But so after that, so that goes on until about line 245. Then at line 246, we get about 60 lines worth of just description of Raphael's flight to Eden. And just in general, for these descriptive parts, like I'm kind of purposely trying to ask you all what you think of this, because like we could kind of just, and I do this in some of my overview videos, but like if I find a line or two that's an interesting allusion to something classical, I kind of just cherry pick it and talk about it, because there's a lot of allusions in these descriptions that we could talk about ad nauseum in a lot of ways. But was there anything interesting to you all there? Because I already talked about one of them in my my overview video, so I don't want to like be too repetitive here.
The one thing I had marked was just like a little later on, but still part of the description, when Adam like walks out to greet Raphael as he's coming down. Raphael is described as his godlike guest, which made me think of the Odyssey and how Odysseus just described like godlike Odysseus. So that definitely made me think of that. And then also like the allusions to like, visiting and hospitality that come with that are very fitting for what's about to happen. And then you also see like, I didn't like look up everything, but all the description as Raphael's flying down, there's so many classical allusions there, which really is setting the stage, I think, for what follows as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I'll just forewarn you all, you're gonna get a ton of like Iliad-esque vibes from book 6. That's all I'm gonna say for now, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about not too far into it.
Okay.
But that might be a good or a bad thing. I don't know. Some people have a hard time with the Iliad, which it's fine. That's fine. I get it. Like it actually, I think it is the hardest of the classic epics to read personally, because of just what it's about and how it's written. But
it's so funny that I think that was my first epic poem, because I wanted to read the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the Aeneid, and I was like, I'm going to read them in chronological order. So I think the Iliad actually was my first experience. And I don't know what kept me going through. That's a whole side note, but I made it.
Yeah, I did the same thing, so I get it.
I'm going to miss all the references, but it'll be cool to reread this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of like kind of reading the epic poems. People kind of, to that point, people have like said to me before, they're like, oh, I can't read Milton because I haven't read Dante, and I can't read Dante because I haven't read Virgil and Ovid, and I can't read Virgil and Ovid because I haven't read Homer. And I'm like, I get it. Like there's some logic and, you know, rationality to that, but you gotta just like dive into the great books where you're interested and just draw connections where you draw connections, because it's still really fun to be like, oh, this is where Milton got that from. It's kind of like, you know, we were like reading the Poetic Edda last like few months ago, and pretty much all of us were like, oh, this is like where Tolkien got this and that and this and that and this and that from, rather than being like, oh yeah, I read the Poetic Edda like 5 times, and then I read Lord of the Rings for the first time. It's like said almost nobody ever in the modern world, right? Like it's not a bad thing. So just keep that
if you
in
had
mind.
to go through chronologically for everything, that would be quite the task.
There's no time. Yeah.
Like, and you would never make it to you'd never make it to Lord of the Rings if you wanted to go through everything from the Poetic Edda.
I do kind of wonder if that's kind of like our minds, how they work now, of like whether it's from media, just knowing like multiverses and serialized format. You're like, I got to know what happened at the beginning. And it's like, no.
Right. And part of it too is just like always knowing that like you're going to revisit, like you should like revisit great books, and they just make more sense the more you read them. And the denser they are, the more you pick up on and the more there is to learn. So there's food for thought there. But Raphael arrives, he comes to Adam and Eve shows him it literally mentions hospitality in the lines, but then it really describes that hospitality. And I think this is a really excellent picture. And hospitality is definitely associated as like really like a feminine like virtue and practice in like the classical tradition. Naturally, I have to say, like, is it probably like inherently more feminine to do hospitable things? And like, I'd probably have to say like yes. Part of that's just like men used to work and fight in wars, and women typically didn't for the most part. And then like it's probably also just in some way embedded into like the feminine substance versus the like masculine substance in a different way. To say like that men and women can and should both be hospitable, my answer would be yes. But it makes sense that Milton is like putting that on Eve here. And I think she's an exemplar of hospitality in this way, because like she wants to give him the best of everything, right? Like she says, like basically it's like the best of everything. She gathers tribute large and on the board heaps with unsparing hand, right? Like she's liberal in her giving of the best things, right? Like she's like, I want my guests to have the best things, right? Rather than like you have like this wine cellar in your basement of fine Italian imports that you've collected, and then every time your friends come over, you go buy like an $8 bottle of wine at Meyer because you're a cheapskate. Like it's like that's like Eve's the opposite of that. She's like, no, like you get the best of my stuff. And I'm like, that's really profound in a lot of ways, right? Like I think being sometimes like you can be like overly shrewd when it comes to your overly shrewd, overly conservative in terms of like what you are willing to give like your friends and your family members versus like yourself in a lot of ways. And I think there's something special about that here. Is there anything else on that section?
No, I had that mark too, just feminine hospitality, but it's a good section.
Yeah, I just think it's like a good lesson for us, especially because like I mean we are like, how much more individualistic does like a society get than like 21st century America, right? Like it's like you might not even get like a hi from like your neighbor if you walk past. You might get like a grunt, like a like that's like sometimes
You're like,
you get like it's like that literally happens, right? Like I'm not making that up, and so it's like, and I've been that grunter before too. It's like I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. I'm not the most outgoing person by any means, but like there's something about like you can sometimes make the Christian faith so like complicated by complex theological thoughts and such things, and there's a space for that, but it's like, how much better off would we be either way if like we just like chose to love our neighbor, like be hospitable to him, our literal neighbor and our everybody else who could be a neighbor in that biblical sense, right? So I think there's just like a good lesson for us in that too. Okay, but after that part we get to, so like it's mainly going to be, and this is going to like really kind of take over the poetic narrative really for really not just the rest of book 5. And you kind of get like these framed stories, right? Where it's like the narrative is Raphael having a dialogue with Adam, where it's mostly Raphael kind of teaching him important things that he needs to know about really Satan and the fall of the angels. But this is going to go on like well into book 6 as well. So this like entire story that he's giving, and a couple of things there. I mean, I think like one thing just worth noting is just kind of like and this like in Milton's time, this wouldn't have been like classical education revival. This would have just been education like itself, because that's how it was back in his day. There was no modern education or progressive like John Dewey-esque education for him to push against, because it didn't exist yet, right? People didn't educate like that. So for Milton and really anybody else, this just would have been like part of how you educate somebody is like, I'm going to tell you this story, and this is like we think of like in a classical school today, like how like a history teacher should teach history, like how a literature teacher should teach literature. It's like, I'm gonna tell you this story or show you this story, and we're gonna really like there's going to be some points to it, like virtue ethics in a lot of ways is going to be the backdrop of it. Like you need to look at the characters and be paying attention to what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're doing, like who's right, who's kind of right, who's wrong, who's good, who's sort of bad, who's completely evil. And it's like that's what Raphael is doing here. Like he's really like he's Adam's like history teacher in a lot of ways specifically. And I think that has significance to the time being the Renaissance, where history as like a academic discipline really picked up a lot, versus where it really wasn't one in the Middle Ages for the most part. But Raphael he's teaching Adam history here. Like he's teaching him like it's kind of literature too, right? Because he's teaching them like the myth of the angelic fall, and it is a myth, but it's a true myth, right? Like I mean, in Lewisian terms, it'd be like, you know, a part of the monomyth, if you may, right? Like the angelic fall. But he's teaching him through storytelling here. And there's a reason for that, right? Like he could just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to engage in rigorous scholastic dialectic here. And we're just going to put some questions on the board, and then we're going to attack them with all our might, and then give like the strongest counter arguments, like the scholastic method in the Middle Ages. But he's going to tell a story. And I think that's just always this thing about what Milton believes about education in a lot of ways, and what the best way is to teach somebody about preparing for the difficult decisions and temptations of life. Like the best way to do that in a way.
Yeah, one interesting thing, I think I need to actually I need to read this, but I had this book for my classical education class for school, and it's like has all these excerpts from all these thinkers throughout history about their views on education. And there's a whole section in there by John Milton. So I actually need to read that, or at least revisit it, because I think I may have read it and just forgotten specifically what he said. But that might be helpful too, looking at this section, if Raphael is meant to be this kind of like teacher character. So maybe I'll have to read that and come back to this part.
Is it called Of Education and written in 1644? Might have like 1644.
Probably.
Next to it. Yeah, it's not even really like, you'd call it a treatise if it was longer, but it's really like, it's almost like a 5,000 word essay. Like it's only like a few pages in like a paperback book. And some, depending on what you have, this one, I have other editions of Paradise Lost that have it, but some editions of Paradise Lost will just have some of Milton's prose writings in there. And sometimes that'll be in there. I have a version right up here that has it, but yeah, worth like if you can find it. You can probably like honestly get a PDF online somewhere if you look hard enough. But I think it's worth reading. And not shameless plug that I did make a video on Milton's philosophy of education for this class. If you scroll back to, I don't know, probably like early May in the course feed, it's there somewhere. So just look it up. You're smart. You'll find it. So, but I do my best to outline that, but obviously it's never as good as if you actually go read it. But really fascinating, actually, the way he thinks about education. I kind of agree with him on most things, especially the part where like boys being educated in the liberal arts should also be like learning like how to wrestle as part of that too. It's something I like genuinely agree with, to be honest. So one of my interesting obscure views, and I stand by it. So
you should like on your Twitter page, like your biography, you should just like switch out your interesting views. That should be one of them. Like bring back wrestling as mandatory.
What's the thing? Because people will be like, "Oh yeah, I'm a classical educator. I work at a classical school. Like we teach people like the way the Greeks and the Romans taught people." I'm like, no, we're really more like modeled after like the 19th century like English and American like educational models, like the liberal arts models. Because if we were really like a Greco-Roman style classical school, like basically all the boys for at least like one period of the day would be like, you know, they'd be squaring off against each other in like a pit of sand, like covered in oil, like having to like throw each other down and like pin somebody for 3 seconds. Like this is how it would be.
Oh my goodness.
and also learning to fight with spears, of course, too. That would be essential for that. So, but
Absolutely, yes.
I'm joking, but I'm not. Like that's actually what they did. So.
Bring back spear training. The woman could maybe learn archery during that time.
Hey, I'm just saying, if you ever like read about like a lot of 19th century like authors, like Russian, English, like a lot of like the poets and like novelists, a lot of them like shot like flintlock pistols for fun. Like that's just like they just sometimes they shoot at each other like in a duel. Like they were kind of nuts.
Well, good to know. Maybe if we want to become as good of authors as they were, we should all pick up a hobby, I guess, new hobby.
Man, I definitely can vouch for the fact that Percy Shelley definitely liked both boats and shooting pistols in like the early 19th century. So look into it.
Well, hey, on our first Mythic Mind excursion, we'll have flintlock pistol dueling.
I would love to have one and to
Start
shoot.
practicing.
Hey, Andrews, if you're watching this, can you approve? We need your stamp of approval.
Anyway, back to Raphael and Adam.
I don't know what area we were at. I did see one that was like kind of where they view like the hierarchy. This might be right before what you were talking about, but when he's saying like the stuff that they're presenting to Raphael is not enough or like not worthy of him, and he's like, no, you actually, he says in the footnotes, although they are spirits of heaven, you, Adam, are created so nobly that it is suitable for you to invite spirits of heaven to visit. Which is interesting to see, because I'm sure I can totally see how Adam was thinking and be like, oh, I'm not even worthy of you coming down. They're like, no, but you are.
That is a pretty powerful moment. And it's interesting of like Raphael being able to partake of their food, which is that whole section was very interesting, that he expounded on that for a bit before they kind of get into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But I had most of my notes. It was interesting when Raphael got into describing heaven itself. And let's see, he describes the creation. And it is interesting, like that he describes like heaven. This is just something I took a note of. But it's like he describes heaven as having an evening and a morning, and he says not for need, but just for change, which was interesting to think about as he's describing that, and what that heavenly night would be like, which he kind of describes as a sort of evening. It's never completely dark.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, right? Because like it's possible that like the heavens like could have like day and night in a sense, right? Like, and especially if like you like kind of like wrap that up in like, you know, the more like late ancient, like medieval and like medieval as well idea that really like the heavens and like the earth like are a lot more. This is obviously like all over the Ransom trilogy too, but like this idea that like the heavens are a lot closer to earth than we think. Like it's not just like the heavens are, you know, way out here or like transcendent, and then like space is just like a cold, dark vacuum, an abyss, and then like we just have earth. But there's obviously like an imaginative sense there, but like you wonder how that would like tie in with all of that.
Yeah, that was interesting. Just an interesting part. I think in your like video where you were talking about this book, like the introductory video, you did talk about the interesting with the thing of kind of like, okay, Milton's not and falling into like Arianism or things here. Kind of with a line that he says like, "This day I have begot whom I declare my only son," which was interesting. Like his description of that, and I guess some people maybe view that in the wrong way of like what he's saying of like the son being a created being in the same way that the angels are created.
Yeah, well, actually, it's kind of like worth talking about now since it came up. Though I'm not sure if Chase is with us, so part of me thinks maybe I should wait for a second, because like I did want to talk about that just because. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like confused with that initially the first time I read it just because, like, I think I got kind of like a little bit mad the first time because I was like, I thought this wasn't because like I had heard like I'm like any controversy with like Milton in the document like De Doctrina Christiana, which like I talk about that in some of the videos and don't want to belabor that point any further, like in these classes. But I'd heard that like you can know for sure at least that like Paradise Lost is like not an Arian text, and that's you know, Lewis even kind of defends that that runs consistent because he's like, you know, we never read Paradise Lost as Arian before, like the De Doctrina Christiana document was discovered in the early 20th century, and so it's like, why are we like taking that back and retrospectively like reading back into it in a way, right? So, but like then, yeah, like I remember reading that and being kind of confused by it, but
Yes.
Yeah, Chase, we're kind of like talking about the section. I think this is in I have the line numbers in here somewhere. I think it's like might be like 500 something. When he's telling the story and he like talks about the part of like the begottenness of the Son, and I totally have this marked in my pages, so I'm just gonna go there because yeah, it's 600. Wow, even further than I thought. But he says, "Hear all ye angels, progeny of light," and this is God talking. "Thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, hear my decree, which unrevoked shall stand. This day I have begot whom I declare my only Son, and on this holy hill him have anointed whom ye now behold at my right hand." So, like, this text may just be strikingly controversial in a way because it almost could sound like there's a point in time where Christ the Son, God the Son, became begotten, which is like not an orthodox Trinitarian belief, right? So I'm kind of curious, like how that came across for you all, like when you first read it.
Yeah, I think I was confused at first. I think the footnote of this edition did help, where it talked about that this event, the proclamation of the Son as Messiah and King over the angels, is the earliest in the action of the poem. The Son is not literally begotten by the Father at this time, but is revealed to the angels, which, as such, because I was thinking that I guess it could make sense of like the angels not, I mean, they could have been created with the knowledge of like what's going on, but it could also be where it's like him describing like, hey, here's the deal, guys. I don't know. So I don't think it's like completely incompatible with Orthodox view.
Yeah, it is interesting that he phrased it in that way when he certainly could have phrased it in a different way that would have been less problematic. So, I mean, I guess he has his reasons, but I certainly was a bit confused when I read it because just the way it portrays almost makes you want to think, like, you just kind of double take a little bit, as, you know, most Orthodox Christians probably would if they encountered that, because we're just so careful about our language concerning the Trinity. But I do think also, like, with him saying today, like, you know, God exists outside of time. And so in a sense, like when he's saying today, it is, what is that? It's not a literal sense of like a 24-hour day, but more, could it even be the sense of more of like today as in the eternal present, in a sense, and then like revealing the Son to the angels. But in that sense, like when you consider that, you know, God being outside time and eternal, when he says today, what it really means is going to be a bit different than we are able to comprehend as creatures who are created inside of time.
Yeah, no, those are good points. And like, yeah, this is important, and I've talked about this in the past in the videos, but like the narratival way in which like we have to understand what Milton's doing is like there is a sense where he's writing about like transcendence in a way. He's writing about things that like take place outside of time, and there's just going to be natural like poetic and literary challenges to him doing that in a way. And I think like if there's like any security, in a sense, like I think it would be like just more apparent in general all the way through if like Christ was like not like co-eternal and like consubstantial of one being with the Father, like the Nicene Creed said he is, and like but like Milton is definitely in line with that. I think it even especially helps like if you just like read, I mean, one, the rest of the poem, but two, like Paradise Regained in a sense too. But like, clearly the way he like portrays like one, like the incarnation in a sense, but two, just like the promises of like, you know, salvation um through like the work of Christ ultimately. Um that like obviously that even that part like later in the poem like wouldn't even work in a sense if like Christ was created. And I mean I do believe that like Milton knows that at the end of the day.
Yeah, and he does it later in book 5, like when Abdiel is talking in like the later 800s, he does talk about the Father through the Son created these beings. And so, yeah, it's just weird phrasing, I would say. But
Yeah, and I guess if we're okay with like moving a little bit ahead, to the point where he gets to the point of where Satan is kind of drawing people away, and then God the Father speaks to the Son, and there's some interesting things in that kind of dialogue there, because the Father says, "Son, thou in whom my glory I behold in full resplendence, heir of all my might. Nearly it now concerns us to be sure of our omnipotence." And I just thought that part was interesting. I was like, wait, like what does he mean by to be sure of our omnipotence? Because he's kind of talking about we need to like, you know, basically tamp down Satan and his kind of uprising. But just like, would God the Father need to be like sure of his omnipotence? Like, need to prove it? I guess maybe he means more like visibly prove it to Satan. Like, I don't know. That part, I kind of also had a similar reaction where I was a bit confused with the way he had worded it.
Yeah, no, understandable. I thought the part was just like worth like marking and at least like talking about, because yeah, a lot of people like struggle with that part, but it seems like, I mean, Paradise Lost, in my estimation at least, seems consistently like orthodox in terms of like its conception of like Trinitarianism and Christology. And honestly, in my opinion, like Milton just in general is consistently orthodox in both of those camps as well. Despite like controversies that arose like literally like 200 plus years after he died because of some piece of paper that people found at the desk and thought that he wrote, which even if he did write it, we don't like know why he wrote it, right? Like people don't always write essays based on that being their own opinions. The essay was kind of originally like really pioneered by like Montaigne and in a sense like Francis Bacon in a lot of ways, and it was like an expression, a form of writing just to kind of really like take an idea and tease it out to its logical conclusions, right? And like if you ever read, like I have them over here because I think they're really fascinating, but like the essays of like Michel de Montaigne, like they're just he writes about like all sorts of different stuff, and like it's really hard to even know which of those things he's actually like defending what he actually believes or not, because he just liked playing with ideas. Like that was fun for him. And so even if like Milton did write that, he was to say he wasn't doing that right. But like it's hard to say, but it's like I mean, plus like I just like Milton, so obviously like I really don't want him to be Aryan. So like I would be sad if he was in a way, but I don't think he is. I really don't. Overall.
yeah, I mean the whole book is writing about all these things that are happening that is not in the Genesis account, you know. So it's like I wouldn't even say like taking liberties or anything, but just like imagining what conversations, what stuff was. I mean, you know, I don't think I didn't get that feeling either, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Oh, are we satisfied with that part then? All right, good. So we get to this part in this story, and this is like this is like definitely my favorite part of book 5 personally, but before we get to my favorite part, even he gets to the point where, so obviously all of the angels, and this is kind of an interesting part of itself, the description, where it's like, it's almost as if like Satan like had like this plan B in a sense, because he pretty like quickly just like is able to like rally. It says like innumerable amounts of angels, right? Like we get like that description again. So there's just like this sea of angels like flying to this other place, like where he's going to. It's like he's like already like prepared this plan and has this alternative plan to go like give like his alternative planning suggestion to like what God's plan actually is, right? Like it's almost like this has already like been like he's been like like whispering in people's ears and stuff for a while, like preparing this. So kind of interesting to think of that in a sense. But then like we get to this speech, but like why is there, I guess, like why is there such a seeming sense of urgency with like Satan summoning this council of some sort?
Like urgency on the part of Satan, or like on the part of needing to respond to it?
It's kind of both. Like it's just like I mean, I read it that way at least, where it seems like it's kind of like a sense of urgency, where he's like, oh, like we need to like call a meeting and get together like right now, and like they're taking flight, and like he wants to get down to business in a sense, and
Well, I mean, every second under the just extremely horrible yoke of having to serve God, you know, he can't even handle it. So if this is like one of the earliest declarations of who the son is to the angels, or like kind of explaining everything to him, like right then he can't even suffer a second.
Which is just, it's so ironic, because in his speech he's like, we need to cast off this yoke, and it's just like, you instantly think of the verse of Christ saying that his yoke is easy and his burden light, and you just think Satan is just, it's too much for him. He doesn't want, and it's like he doesn't want any yoke over him, and yet in his speech he says that orders and degrees jar not with liberty, but well consist, which is just so ironic, because he's throwing off the order of heaven and the whole cosmic order that God has established and his place in it, because he just wants to be on top. He really could like modify that statement to just say orders and degrees jar not with liberty, but well consist, also like as long as I'm like at the top of the hierarchy. Like the fact that he's like so powerful, but it really is shocking to see like specifically what made him so upset was like Christ and his exalted status was ultimately what made Satan so envious.
I need to be at the top of the hierarchy. That I don't even like the hierarchy, but if there is no hierarchy, I'm still going to be at the top of it.
It's just so funny, because he wants to throw off the hierarchy, and he makes it seem as though in some ways, and sometimes he makes it seem like we don't need any hierarchy, we're all equals. In some ways he's like, oh, hierarchy is great. Either way, what he really wants is to just be at the top guy.
Yeah, it kind of like reminds you of like just like revolutions in history, where it's like anti-monarchical, like anti like czar, and like like the Russian culture, obviously over 100 years ago, and all these things. But it's really just to like supplant the current hierarchy, to infuse your own hierarchy, where you sit at the top of the hierarchy. It's like that's what a tyrant does, right? Like a tyrant is in a lot of ways just like the absolute worst kind of monarch. It's like you're still the top of the hierarchy, just like the monarch, but in the worst way possible. Only for your own gain, whereas like the true monarch does everything with the best interest of like their subjects in mind. Like they rule for the love of the people, not themselves. The tyrant does the opposite. Rules for love of self and not the people. Uses the people for love of self if needed, and often that will be the case. Absolutely.
Yes. And just his whole argument, really does ring true to that situation. Even just saying, like, he says, who can in reason then, or right assume monarchy over such as live by right his equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal. she's like, we're all equal in freedom. So regardless of our relative amounts of power and splendor, we should all be equal. But then it's just so funny because no, like he doesn't really want equality. He just wants to be in charge.
Does this remind you of anything that's going on in America today? Not to get political at all, but
I don't think we have to search far for.
Does it just remind you of like postmodernism in general, though, where it's like, let's be honest, a lot of people in like postmodern ideologies, like they want basically like, and like we don't have to pick on postmodernism. We can pick on like communism in a sense, like itself, right? Where it's like everything's supposed to be egalitarian, but things never end up being egalitarian, and it's like people like people like Stalin, like ultimately like don't want it to be egalitarian. Like you think like Stalin wanted to be equal with like his subjects and the people below him. Like of course not. Like
I think it's so much like shows appeals to like egalitarian society and stuff always just makes me think of somebody that's weak and can't be at the top of the hierarchy anyway, and this is the only way that they can do it is bringing everyone down to their level, and then they can jump ahead.
No, it's exactly right.
Yeah,
it's exactly how it goes.
It's just the age old arguments that have just enslaved so many, and Satan's employing them to great effect. And I suppose the first to do so in the history of.
He is. I mean, like Satan is just like he's the OG like
pioneer,
tyrant, narcissistic figure, right? Like every like awful like dictator or cult leader or just the super narcissistic person you could just meet on the streets at any given time. Like they're all just these watered down like lesser versions of like
of Satan.
Satan really is the ultimate form of that, right? Like he's just like the final form of like the worst, like all of the worst people you can think of in this world.
It's almost like in worshiping God and in growing more in righteousness and holiness, like you become in a sense more of yourself in like a good way. Like there's this greater sense of individuality and like the way God has created people to be so varied and so in certain ways. But then like for all those who are becoming evil, there's this sense of like almost just conformity to like the standard of evil, which would be ultimately like Satan. So they're all just like mini Satans. And they almost lose the things about them that were good, that God had created in conformity to just, I don't know exactly where I'm going that, but there's a sense of these same people want everyone to like kind of look the same. And they just want, uniformity. Whereas there's actually like a beautiful kind of variety that comes from conformity like to Christ in a sense. And you see that even just within the church.
Yeah, I think you even see that like I think it's like Ephesians 4 where like you get like the body of Christ like metaphor from St. Paul, it's like that's just the variety of like you've got like the mouth and the hands and the feet and like everything else that he describes in that chapter. Like it's like it was never meant to be egalitarian in a way.
Mm-hmm. Or at least like, in a sense, like everyone is, equal in one sense, but also like we don't have the same roles. There's order, there's distinction between people, even in just their abilities. And it's impossible to make people like these people today who try to do this, like they fail because it's impossible to ultimately completely level the playing field because people are given different endowments of giftings, even when it just comes to like intelligence or capacity to handle situations or lead or charisma or physical appearance. Like there's only so far you can level things. You can't fully get rid of what God has given.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if y'all ever played like a game of or a session or even a full campaign of like Dungeons and Dragons before, but it's like you roll like your dice to like ultimately like determine and choose like what stats, like your natural stats your character starts out with. And it's like there's like a sense in which like God gives us all like natural stats in a way, right? And like capacities in different ways. So it's almost like, yeah, like you build like a character and like, or like you build like a character in an RPG video game, right? And it's like, obviously God's like that, not like like mechanical in that sense when he creates people, but like, yeah, like it's like there's it's innate, right? It's deeper than that, and you just can't snuff it out and suppress it at the end of the day. Anyway, I had to use that Dungeons and Dragons like RPG analogy, so I'm always looking for opportunities to throw that one out there. So
There you go.
it's like one of my like, I have like friends and I who will be like, "What do you think like this person's like natural stats are?" Like it's so much funny.
That's so funny. I've never thought about it that way before, but now I'm not going to be able to unthink it.
You can't, right? And it's like I even think of like capacities in people. I'm just like I read like Plutarch's Lives edition of like his story of like Alexander the Great, and I'm like,
Natural
dude,
stats.
this guy's capacity was absolutely insane.
What a guy.
He had like 18 of every stat. Like just
He just had like the Iliad like under his pillow. Like what a cool.
yeah.
Also, what a person in so many ways.
Yeah. A whole other conversation devoted to Alexander the Great someday. Mark your calendars.
We should. Wait, what if we had like a Mythic Mind like series and we went through some different historical figures?
I would 100% do a Plutarch's Lives book club. Like everybody should read
That'd be
Plutarch's
perfect.
Lives. It's super. They're super fun. But
I really need to read Plutarch's Lives. It's been on the list for a while.
Yeah, offline we will definitely discuss, because I'm like, yeah, Plutarch's like an S tier level like classical author for me. It doesn't get much better than Plutarch. But to wrap up the class, I did want to talk about I want, so like we have like Satan's speech, and I think like we kind of just get a lot of what we get from Satan in his other speeches in a lot of ways, right? We've clearly identified. I mean, we get like the descriptive lines here where it's this is before the speech, but it basically says, "But not so waked Satan, so call him now. His former name is heard no more in heaven. He of the first, if not the first archangel, great in power, in favor, in preeminence, yet fraught with envy against the Son of God that day, honored by his great Father and proclaimed Messiah, King anointed, could not bear through pride that sight, and though himself impaired." So perhaps like one, like that might even just tell us in that narrative that like that whole purpose was just, it wasn't the begetting of Christ, as if like in Trinitarian language we say that like we talk about like the relationship between God the Father and God the Son is like the eternal begetting of Christ, right? So it's not like the beginning takes place at a point in time, like they're both eternal beings. But we don't have a sense here where it doesn't really seem like the narrative is talking about like a beginning, but rather that like this is like God's when like, oh yeah, here's like I'm going to announce that like Christ is like going to be like this the messianic figure for like the people, right, in a sense. So perhaps that even points back and sort of answers the question for us in a way there. I think there are clues in other parts of Paradise Lost as well for that, but we get that like yet fraught with envy. It's like that's obviously like Satan's motive like all the time. Like he's envying Adam and Eve in book 4. Like he's envious of, you know, the other angels in a sense in like the first 2 books. But really like in a lot of his speech, it's really just the same. He's just kind of putting on this envy, clothing himself in this envy. Like it's going on full display, and that's just going to ooze out of him and everything he says, really, no matter how he dresses it up. But from there, and this is the part that like is my favorite part of the book, it's like we get Abdiel. And like
so good.
Abdiel is just awesome. Like no other way to say it.
Truly.
Abdiel is like he's like one of the most Chad characters in this poem. Just to like use
yes,
modern postmodern slang. But no, this is like really like as a man, like it's like I read Abdiel and I'm just like I want to be like Abdiel when I grow up. And I'm not even saying that as a joke. It's just like that's like this is like why part of why we read literature, and like why when we see exemplars of virtue, like this helps you to want to be like Abdiel is like Christian courage here, and it's like this makes me want to be courageous, right? It's like
It does.
in history reading like the account of like the martyrdom of like Polycarp in a sense, where he's like about to be like burned at the stake, and they call him an atheist because he doesn't believe in the Roman gods, and then he points back to them and says, "Out with the atheists," right? Because he's like, "No, I believe in God. You're the atheist because you worship these statues and icons in a sense." If you've never read like the Martyrdom of Polycarp, it's an excellent, another excellent example of like the courage of like the early church martyrs. But I say that's like all to make a point that it's just like we need these stories, like these encouraging stories of like martyrs and of people who stand firm amidst opposition. It's like Abdiel's like the only one that stands up, and like he's completely unshakable and unwavering, like in all of his speech and actions. Like he doesn't even hesitate to get up, first of all. But Abdiel doesn't he doesn't seem like nervous. He doesn't seem like he's shaking in his boots. Like he doesn't stutter. Like he just clearly responds and calls Satan out on his crap, for the lack of a better phraseology in some sense. Like he calls it out on the spot, like, and he doesn't hesitate. He shows like no fear in doing that, right? He's like really like the exemplar of courage that like Milton is putting before us, and that's like it's just like profound for me to read in a sense, and he really like exemplifies a lot of those just kind of like this, like that unwavering obedience, right? Like we talked about obedience over and over again as like one of like the core central motifs of Paradise Lost, and that's really it, right? Like there's this George MacDonald sermon I was just reading, I think like earlier today or last night, but he was preaching on like Matthew 20:25 through 28, which like talks about like, you know, the least will be greatest and such, right? I don't have the exact verses pulled up, but like we probably have all heard that one before. And he talks about like this example of like the knight, and like the knight, like they have to like serve a family for like 7 years, and then they have to serve as a squire to an actual knight for several years, where they just serve. They don't do any of the cool stuff. They just serve, and they're just there. Like they don't like get really any like honor or renown or even like armor and stuff like that. But even when they become the knight, like they serve the kingdom for the rest of their life. And that's like just their life is service, right? Like their life is obedience. It's the chivalric virtues of courage, nobility, loyalty, obedience, justice, all of those things. And we kind of almost see like those knightly chivalric virtues in a sense, like in Abdiel in a way. And Abdiel's like really, he exemplifies what Lucifer should have been, even though he's not as high on the celestial hierarchy, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love what you're saying, like in the video for this week, about how like in Milton, like heroism is like aligning yourself with the will of God, and just seeing how like Satan has all these trappings and the fancy speeches of like a classical hero in a sense, and yet the true hero here is the lesser angel, is Abdiel, who is exemplifying courage in this like truly remarkable way. Like I can't even quote from it, because if I do, I'm just gonna keep reading like his whole response, and then the description after it. Just among the faithless, faithful only he is just, oh, it's so good, and it's something like you just, as a Christian, you just want to strive for to be faithful found, and just like what an inspirational moment, and just to see finally like someone talking like not afraid to just talk some sense to Satan, and just really, it really is a great moment.
Yeah, absolute wordsmith, and his ability to rebuke Satan, just intense, man. I loved it. His last one was so good.
So good.
Yeah, and he was really like kind of talking about like that that place in the celestial hierarchy, yet one is obedient and one is not. I think here's one of like the takeaways for that is like it's better to be lowly and in line with God's will than to be of a higher status, higher capacity, having more talents, intellect, all these things, but to deviate from God's will, right? Like it's just like you're better off like there's times and this isn't me like picking on like Roman Catholics or the papacy or anything, but like even most like solid Catholics today admit that there was some pretty messed up stuff in like the Western High Middle Ages, and that like even Dante put some of the popes in hell, right? Like what does that tell you? And it's like these popes that Dante puts in hell, they're at the top of the hierarchy, but they've deviated from the will of God. And it's like it's better off to be like the lowly, unnamed, completely forgotten, like corn farmer out in like the hills of Tuscany somewhere, and nobody even knows who you are, than it is to be like one of like the wicked popes or bishops or cardinals of that time. And it's like I'm not just picking on a specific denomination here. You could say that about anybody in like any hierarchy, because like with pretty much every culture has their examples of people who were leaders and like they did a horrible job and squandered it all, right? But you're better off just being, if you're gonna like being in a leadership position is gonna like just destroy your faith and your obedience, but like not being in that position is not going to. You're better off just being the lowly, lowly humble servant, right? Like it's better just be that. Like you'd rather be Abdiel than Lucifer any day at this point.
Yes.
Or at least you can want to be.
Yeah, just with great power comes great responsibility, and you even just see like the people who today, you know, have so much. It's just if like especially like even just like Protestant Christian leaders too. You can look at least it's like where I know more of as a Protestant, but just like you see like a lot of people who are like the most popular, or the highest, like very well praised, like when like they do fall, it's just like a great fall. And yeah, you almost think better to be some like not like even like, you know, just not super like theologically brilliant, like, you know, but just super faithful, reading your Bible, like just obscure congregation member in some like country church somewhere in the middle of nowhere,
right?
Who just like faithfully attends every week and reads your Bible, and you know you might not know like the best hermeneutic to like approach everything or etc., but you know you have the heart of a servant, like, you know,
right.
better to be that than some like brilliant Bible scholar who goes awry.
Most definitely. And I'm not drawing like a parallel here to say that like Abdiel was like the village idiot of the angels, because I don't think he is, but I'm going to draw a parallel here with like the lowliness aspect. And it's like one of the things I've always been drawn to about like the movie Forrest Gump is that like Forrest Gump is like he's literally an idiot. Like I'm not being derogatory, but he's like mentally like he's just deficient. That's just the way God made Forrest Gump, right? But it's like he just does the right thing and like he doesn't even hesitate, right? Like you ever just watch that movie and just notice that like he just always just why'd you do that? And he's like basically I don't know, I just did or something, or it's just like that was just the right thing to do. Like he doesn't even have to think about it. Like there's something to that. It's like I don't know. I really like the holy fool archetype, by the way. So it's like I don't know if anybody's ever like read about that, but like I love it for that reason though. It's just because like it's sometimes yes, education could lead people on the path of virtue, but then sometimes people are educated and they're like John Stuart Mill and they just like reject the entire tradition that was handed to them for the first 20 something years of their lives anyway, right? Like it's mysterious. It's hard to say why that happens, and ultimately we don't know, I think. Is there anything else on Abdiel or any final comments in general, though, so we can kind of cut off this recording so it doesn't get too long? All right, well, that's a wrap for the class tonight. Thank you both for participating and being here. Hope this video is helpful and enjoyable to those who are listening, but this will be the end of our class, so thank you and God bless.